Chapter 3, being the sad cautionary tale of the Orange Roughy. The amount of food for each species, of course, gives the extreme limit to which each can increase. Charles Darwin on the Origin of Species. Page 41. If you look at a map of the world or a globe and see how 2/3 of the earth is covered by ocean, you might imagine that there are a lot more fish in the world than there really are. That is exactly what most people did think for many years. Page 41. The ocean that fishermen knew was full of fish, but that was because they did not go very far. Sea life, as with land life, depends on sunlight. Wherever the sea is strongly penetrated by sunlight, vegetable nutrients grow. The area becomes rich in nitrates, which stimulates the growth of plankton. Plankton is really a grouping of many tiny plants and animals. Some of them are only one cell that drift in the sea. Some, such as phytoplankton, are plants. Others, such as zooplankton, are animals. Phytoplankton, floating plants, come in many types and shapes, but are so small that they can only be seen through a microscope. Like land-based plants, they are green because they are filled with a substance called chlorophyll, which uses energy from the sunlight to create sugars for food, which in turn creates carbon dioxide. This process, which sustains plant life on Earth, is called photosynthesis. It is a very old system, created some 3.5 billion years ago, when the only living organisms were microscopic and the Earth was full of gases. Phytoplankton are found where the sunlight penetrates the sea, and since this is the beginning of the sea's food chain, this is where the most life is found. Because there are so many phytoplankton, there are huge numbers of a slightly larger creature called zooplankton, which eat phytoplankton. Zooplankton range in size from microscopic to almost 8 inches. Top of page 42. Some zooplankton are actually larvae that eventually change into worms, mollusks, crustaceans, coral, and even some types of fish. They also help to control one of the earliest forms of life, bacteria. A sea with plentiful zooplankton provides plentiful food for tiny shrimp-like creatures called krill. Krill are one of the smallest forms of sea life that humans actually eat. Though they're so small, most people don't even bother with them. This is a good thing because much sea life depends on krill, and these creatures would not do well if they had to compete with humans for food. Herring eat krill, for instance, as do giant humpback whales. Several times the size of an elephant, the humpback whale is one of the largest mammals on Earth, and yet it feeds on one of the tiniest forms of life in the world. Page 44. Some fish swim near the bottom of the ocean and can swim up to eat smaller fish or down to eat the shellfish living at the sea floor. These are slow, steady hunters who stay close to home and whose muscles constitute the white meat that most people prefer to eat. Fish with white meat, such as cod, haddock, flounder, and halibut, are the most appreciated and the highest priced fish available. But there are also fish that swim in the middle water, just a little below the surface, fast, hard-swimming animals who sometimes travel long distances. These fish, such as sardines, anchovies, herring, mackerel, and even a few large fish, such as tuna, have muscles that are darker and flesh that's a little oilier than most white fish. By netting large quantities of these cheaper fish, a fisherman could still earn a good living. The smaller of these middle water fish, which feed on krill that feed on zooplankton that feed on phytoplankton, are eaten by the larger white meat fish on the bottom. Trying to escape hungry predators such as cod, the smaller fish from the middle depths swim to the surface for safety, and that's just where seabirds swoop down and eat them. Top of page 45. Darwin was right. A healthy ecosystem is based on the destruction of life and the struggles for survival among species, and it is in such systems that men in the form of fishermen are drawn to take part in the killing. 90% of the fishing they do is within 200 miles of land. Further out to sea, there is life and there are fish, but many of them live at great depths that have not been explored because until recently we didn't have the ability to reach that far below the surface. Sidebar on page 45. The base of the original North American fishing industry was established in the 17th century. For centuries, the Grand Banks, a series of wide shoals, shallow patches of ocean running around 100 miles offshore along the Atlantic coast from Newfoundland to New England, were especially rich with bottom-dwelling fish such as cod and halibut. The ports of St. John's in Newfoundland and Gloucester in Massachusetts were established because of their nearness to the Great Banks, Grand Banks. And Boston became an important port by trading the salted cod caught on the banks. The Flemish Cap, which is more than 350 miles from the nearest ports, is the farthest of the banks, while the Grand Bank, which is the larger than Newfoundland, is the biggest. Georges Bank, the southernmost bank off of New England, is larger than the state of Massachusetts. Page 46. Most attempts to commercialize fish hauled in from farther out at sea have proven disastrous in a very short time because of our lack of understanding of this deep water life system. The Orange Roughy is an excellent example. Orange Roughy. The Orange Roughy gets its name from the orange color it turns after it dies. When it's alive, it's actually red. The fact that it's named after its appearance when it's dead shows that few have ever seen it alive. It is a large species in a family of deep water fish known as Trachythidae or slimeheads. It was first found in the western Pacific, where it lives in cold water at depths as great as 5,000 feet. Page 47. Fishermen were not capable of reaching the Orange Roughy until the 1970s, but once they did, eating Orange Roughy became fashionable in Australia, the United States, and many other places in the world well into the 1990s. It was not understood that this species was not like other fish we had known. For one thing, many scientists think that an Orange Roughy lives for 150 years, which is at least 5 times as long as most of the fish we know. The age is disputed, with some saying it lives even longer, but the problem with this long-lived species is that it grows very slowly. Top of page 48. The fish doesn't even become capable of producing offspring until it is 20 years old, which would be an older fish than most of the species we know. This means that many Orange Roughy that appear to be mature are actually quite young and haven't yet reproduced. The large-scale killing of fish that haven't yet reproduced will, in time, destroy them, and that's exactly what happened to the Orange Roughy populations off New Zealand and Australia, where the fish were first discovered. Top of page 49. After little more than 10 years, the Australian Orange Roughy population was only 10% of what it had been in the 1990s. So fishermen went looking somewhere else for this popular new species and found it in the Atlantic Ocean off southern Africa as well as farther north from Morocco to Iceland. Just as it happened with the Australian Orange Roughy, these populations very quickly showed signs of vanishing. The sad story of how the Orange Roughy became one of the world's most threatened fish populations within decades of being discovered by us should serve as a caution to what could happen. Who knows what years of dragging nets through these deep, unknown oceans is doing to deep water ecosystems? We are probably damaging and destroying species we haven't even discovered yet and will never know about. It would follow the laws of Darwin if it turned out that rare fish in hard-to-reach places had fewer chances of survival than large populations of more familiar fish living in ideal environments closer to shore.